Welcome back. If the state and federal government just don't use the term climate change, does that mean the problem simply goes away? Not in Sarasota. The city is taking a new approach to raising awareness about sea level rise by including markers on Lido Beach and planning for the future with an adaptive plan. Meanwhile, in Washington, employees at the Environmental Protection Agency were told to remove their website's climate change page. If the website goes dark, one EPA staffer told Reuters, years of work we have done on climate change will disappear. And joining us to discuss more is Rod Thompson, the president of the Sarasota Republican Club, Frank Alcock from the New College of Florida, and David Hastings, a professor of marine science at Eckerd College, the man who tried to explain the concept change of climate change to Governor Rick Scott. How did that go?
You know, it's not a hard concept to explain. I teach 18-year-olds climate change every year, every day. So it's not hard. He didn't appear to be interested or engaged. So in the end, it didn't go well. But he understands climate change. He understands what's going on. He's a businessman. And so he does, in fact, understand what's going on with sea level rise and with temperature rising and the business consequences of it.
It's kind of like, and I know we were going to go to Rod first, but President Trump has said that climate change is really a fake news, conspired by China. But at the same time, he's asking, I believe, in Scotland for some funding to protect his golf course there from sea level rise.
He's a businessman.
So, Rod, the question here is the dichotomy. Here we have in Sarasota a whole conference with some of the greatest experts in Florida talking about what's happening in our community now and what we need to do to protect our community in the future from sea level rise. But you have the President of the United States and the Governor of Florida basically seemingly deny the existence of what we're having a conference about.
Well, I think here's the problem, from my point of view, both political and as an observer of this, but not as a scientist. And that is that we can look at the data, we can see, how much global warming is going on, how fast it's going on. We can have a conversation later about, the accuracy of the models and predictions and that sort of thing. And so you can look at that. That's pretty easy to measure. I think where a lot of people start getting skittish about it is how much of this is anthropogenic. How much of it is caused by man? And to me, while it's easy to say that's settled science, that's done, we all know that's the case and all, some of the data, to me, just looking at it, again, as a person, makes me question that. And the number of scandals that have gone on, which we can talk about, but the number of scandals that have gone on from emails and others within the climate scientist community gives people like me pause to say, can we trust the data or not? Or is there something more at work on this issue than just science? If it was just science, we'd all feel more comfortable.
Frank, we hear that all the time. We hear on one side saying that the evidence is indisputable, and on the other side we say, well, scientists really don't agree.
It becomes politicized very quickly, but I would prefer scientists come back to the basics, which would be to start off. We've known for well over 100 years that if you double carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, the amount of energy, roughly accurately for over 100 years, what that would trap. Where does that energy go? Most of it appears to be taken up by the oceans right now. That is not even in skeptical science. That is not contested. Where it becomes a bit more unclear is the amplification of things like water vapor, because as the atmosphere begins to rise from that initial pulse, water vapor is itself a greenhouse gas. And so you have these positive feedbacks, and there's some uncertainty on how hot it's going to get. But I think people then, they take their eyes off. It's warm out there. Is there some other thing that's causing it? There's been a lot of climate change over history. Yes to all those questions. And they may be skeptical about science in general, but the basics are pretty clear.
So, David, I mean, you hear this all the time. You study sea level rise and climate change, but there are people who say, well, not all the scientists agree on this, and certainly you probably can find some scientists who believe that if there is any kind of sea level rise or warming, it is not man-made.
So the science is clear, and the vast majority, 97% of the folks, the scientists who are actively publishing in climate science, and these aren't other scientists, these are climate scientists, believe that the temperature is increasing, which it is, and that it's due to human influence. It's what we're doing. It's not natural, and that's very clear. There's really, in the scientific community, there's very little, if no, debate about that. When I go to my national and international meetings, we aren't discussing if it's due to human influence. It is. We know that.
We only have like 25 seconds left, but do you take David at his word here?
Well, sure, at his word, but the 97% thing, now that's been clearly debunked. We had just last year, we had client scientists from U.S. and from Canada, and they did it in the Journal of Science and Education. They published it.
All right, we're going to have to pick this up in just a moment. Our discussion will continue in a moment, right after we check the weather. Welcome back. How is Sarasota trying to look ahead when it comes to climate change? By the same token, state and federal government, with so much not going or talking a lot about climate change these days, we are joined tonight by Rod Thompson, the president of the Sarasota Republican Club, and Frank Alcock from New College of Florida, and David Hastings, a professor of marine science at Eckerd College. And I wanted to pick up where we left off. Rod, you were making the point when people who believe or are concerned about climate change bring up the fact that 93% of scientists concur.
Right. There's a very famous stat out there that says 97% of scientists agree that there's global warming that's man-caused. And I think it's the second part that where there's a lot of disagreement on that. So there was a study that was done, it was published last year in the Journal of Science and Education by 5 climate scientologists that looked at the base studies that were included in Mr. Cook's report there, and they found only 41 of the 11,944 published climate studies examined by the author explicitly stated mankind caused the global warming since 1950. So their point is that those numbers have been fudged just like a lot of other numbers have been fudged.
David?
It's just not true. And over the break, I invited him to come to a climate science meeting where national or international meeting, we're not discussing the kind of things you're discussing. That journal you refer to, I'm sorry, but I've never heard of it before. It's not a well-known or well-respected journal in science.
So one thing I would ask you then...
That's what I want you to do, is
Sure.
go out to my community of climate change scientists and ask a bunch of us. We're not discussing these things. This is not something that we're concerned about it politically.
Here's the deal. The rest of the country is discussing these things, though, and the rest of the country is going to be what drives the politics of it. So when you had the Climate Gate email scandal from the University out of England, where it was revealed that there were serious ongoing attempts to cook the books to make the data show more global warming than there had been, that sort of thing, plus other scandals that have erupted around it, put into question the veracity of the data and the climate scientists, and there is a fear that a lot of climate scientists are becoming more activists than scientists, and at that point they really can't be trusted as scientists, not personally here.
I hate to go back to this email debacle, but that was really exaggerated tremendously. This is very old news. I'd rather talk about what's going on now, and I'd rather talk about how we can solve this exceptionally important problem.
Frank, let me ask you this, because most often you hear around the country, I remember hearing Chris Christie talk about this, that even if you believe that we are affecting climate, the question then becomes, what do you do about it? And what you do about it should not impact industry and the economy in a negative way. That's what a lot of conservatives say is the rub, even if they believe that the climate is warming.
Well, I mean, if you can take that to the extreme, and so that nothing that you would do in terms of a regulation would at any point have any cost whatsoever, there are a number of things that actually industry might benefit from. But I think the question of what do we do, I think what the scientific community is telling us is that there are a number of risks. These are not like 50 or 100 years away. A lot of risks are they're manifesting now, and they're going to get increasingly pronounced. And so I think we can have adult conversations about, from both a private as well as a public sector perspective, what makes the most sense in terms of managing these risks in a reasonable way. And we could disagree upon that, but I'd like to have the conversation about the risk management, not necessarily whether or not climate change is happening.
Rod, I'm wondering what your take is. As a former journalist, you are so often on as president of the Sarasota Republican Club. I don't know if people realize that you were a reporter for many, many years. So when you hear about the new administration shutting down the EPA's webpage on climate change, and EPA staffers saying, look, if this goes dark, years of our work will just disappear. As a journalist, that must bother you in some way.
Yeah, shutting it down seems to me to be an absurd step to take. I would say I might suggest an overall review of the numbers and the data and include people, even some that are skeptics, that are out there that are skeptics, bring them on, have a review of it that way. But what that reflects, Alan, is going back to, you remember when U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch was testifying before Congress, and she was saying that the Justice Department was investigating whether they could sue people who questioned whether global warming was man-caused or not, scientists and others who questioned it, which sent up all sorts of red flags. But what it shows is how dramatically politicized this issue is.
It's politicized, yes. The question that I often ask is, people feel strongly about this, but do they vote on the basis of this? Because obviously, I would say the vast majority of Americans believe that climate change is happening and it's a concern, but they don't make that decision in the voting booth.
Yep. That's correct. And I think to add on to that, we don't fundamentally, the voting public doesn't use hard information to base their decisions on. Instead, we're using our community, who we drink beer with, who we shoot pool with, who we go bowling with. And so it's our community that impacts who we vote for, not the basic data. And as a scientist, I would really like to see the voting public use hard science to make their decisions on climate change science.
Yeah, I think on the left, you have a number of people that will vote Democratic, or even farther to the left, Democratic, for whom this is an extremely passionate issue. Believe it or not, on the right, it's almost a cause célèbre for the Tea Party, and it is something that they're very angry about, and in the opposite direction, because they think the whole thing is a hoax. But they're going to vote Republican anyway. Then you do have some swing voters and some people that come in and out of the political system. They just don't vote on the basis of climate change. It's other things.
No, matter of fact, the first thing they'll usually vote on is going to be pocketbook, and the second thing is national security. Those two things are almost always going to drive top-end voting for president and probably for senators and congressmen and all. And so there's a lot of other important issues out there, and they really are rarely the ones that will drive a vote.
So meanwhile, a nice sprinkle is going to flood out the roads of Miami Beach, and you have the city of Sarasota putting up big, things on the beach showing, sea level rise and preparing the community for what's yet to come.
Right, and that's the concern. There are exceptionally challenging times ahead for us, and we can do something about it, or we can just continue as business as usual.
All right. We will be back with final thoughts in just one moment. Welcome back. It's time for final thoughts, and we want to do this from the perspective of each and every one of your specialties. So, Rod, I'm going to talk to you because we're hearing both sides of this conversation. What do you want people to take away from it?
Well, really, what I'd like people to take away from it is encouraging maybe the scientific community to try and improve their credibility with the broad range of American people. Right now, it's become so politicized, and there's so many questions about the data itself and what it really means and what it's really causing, that I think it's up to, in a sense, up to the scientific community to sort of clean house. They've had some scandals, to sort of put those things behind them and say, okay, we're all coming together here. This is the bottom line. You can trust this. I'm not sure how they get there, but I think that if we don't get that step, I think there's going to be a real problem getting a broad swath of the American people to really trust it enough to make dramatic changes.
Frank, given how politicized this is the question right now in terms of whether you're on the right or left on this issue, mitigation and dealing with it, and because this is going to affect our businesses and insurance companies and so on and so on.
There's a whole conversation around mitigation with respect to slowing down the amount of greenhouse gases that we put into the atmosphere. Our behavior or the world's behavior may be contingent upon what we do in this country. That's a big conversation. But the conversation here in Florida and in Sarasota, the one that I prefer to focus on, it's on the adaptation side. There are some very real risks. Climate change will be multiplying these risks. What do they look like? They look like sea level rise, combined with extreme weather events, flooding, beach erosion, there are going to be issues. We need to be thinking about where we build our public infrastructure. If we have a major hurricane, we need to be thinking about how we're going to redevelop after that. We need to be thinking about what you can and cannot do with your private property, and we need to be thinking about whether all of us are going to be subsidizing the people that live on the barrier islands. These are the conversations that I want to have.
That is mitigation. It doesn't stop what is you are saying is happening. So, you know, where do you go when you have people like Rod saying,
Right.
you know, the scientific community has got to clean up its act because, you know, at this stage, that is the position of the administration.
Right. Well, that's a political position, and it's based on politics. The science is clear. The temperature of the planet is increasing, and we know it's due to human influence. That is clear. And it's happening very quickly. That's another great concern we have. This is not like the natural climate cycles, which happen very slowly over geological time. It's happening very quickly. The really good news is that we can do something about it, and that's where I think we need to lead the conversation. Republicans right now are favoring putting a tax on carbon, putting a price on carbon, and that's an extremely effective way of reducing our carbon use.
We have less than a minute, but Rod, do you see Republicans agreeing to put a tax on carbon?
Not en masse, no. There would be a few here and there that have come out in favor of it on and off, but the party as a whole is not going to, because I think that what you see is that would be a huge anchor, chain and ball on the economy and on jobs.
I don't know if we solved anything tonight, but at least we talked about it. Gentlemen, thank you.